I want to use the space of this class to discuss a number of issues related to the distribution and use of knowledge resources in the digital realm. As we will see from the discussion, which will be preliminary rather than exhaustive, the situation is far more complex than we realize, and I will try to indicate some of these complexities. But my primary focus will be on the idea of the knowledge commons or the digital commons. The term commons is applied to goods or resources that are held in common by members of a community, or by extension all human beings, or even all animals or all living beings according to some environmental activists. Originally applied in British law to common land, especially pasture, it has come to refer in modern economics to all resources held in common by a society. Within this framework, the notion of the knowledge commons indicates a shared pool of information, data, or knowledge resources, both held and managed in common by users. The main difference between knowledge as a resource and other kinds of goods is that while other goods, such as food, for example, may be depleted or exhausted by increased consumption, knowledge or intellectual property is not reduced or exhausted, and may indeed be increased by being opened up to a larger community of users. Thus, knowledge resources are what we call non-deductible, that is, they are not diminished by use. In that case, we might ask, why is knowledge not automatically a commons? Why are there any measures to restrict or regulate the flow of knowledge? There are two answers to this. First of all, authors, artists, and inventors seek to assert their intellectual property right or copyright in a work in order to benefit from sales of the work and thus earn a livelihood. We know, for example, that music artists are very disturbed by the extent and range of music piracy, which drastically reduces their sales and distribution earnings. Secondly, in many cases, governments, institutions, or official organizations seek to restrict access to information that they deem unsuitable for widespread distribution. Examples of such restriction may range from pornography to classified government files and sensitive data that the state does not wish to share with the public or with its enemies. Think, for example, of the stringent measures that are in force internationally to prevent the circulation of child pornography on the internet. Or think of the huge international scandal around the activities of WikiLeaks and its founder, Julian Assange, now on the run from the governments of many countries. In fact, WikiLeaks is a good example of the way in which the ideology of a digital commons has actively contested the state's investment in secrecy by flouting the provisions of the Official Secrets Act in order to make information public. Wikipedia describes it as follows. WikiLeaks is an international, non-profit, journalistic organization which publishes secret information, news leaks, and classified media from anonymous sources. I have quoted here from Wikipedia, which is another prime example of a shared digital resource, an encyclopedia of knowledge that is collectively produced and managed and which does not belong to any single owner or group, but rather to the community of users. Wikipedia is one of the resources that are available in the general field that we call the digital commons. Such intellectual resources are not only accessible to the community at large, but collectively managed and added to, using ideas like collective intelligence or the wisdom of crowds or crowdsourcing. They would include open educational resources like the courseware provided by MOOCs, for example, open source software, open design, Wikipedia, and a host of other wikis, works licensed under Creative Commons, and open public repositories for scholarly work like the Science Commons and the Digital Commons. In fact, the drive towards creating and developing such resources is part of an extremely important intellectual and social campaign led by scientists, scholars, and sociologists in various parts of the world. The campaign argues that knowledge should be free and universally accessible, and that with the advent of the digital condition, which makes access and sharing so easy, intellectual resources should form part of a worldwide knowledge commons. It contests what has been referred to by James Boyle as the second enclosure movement, threatening to enclose the intangible commons of the mind, to use his phrase, and to use copyright law to make knowledge only a privileged minority possession, that is, to privatize and restrict knowledge acquisition. Against copyright, therefore, this group advocates what is called copyleft, that is, the freedom to distribute and share knowledge and to put all intellectual resources into the public domain. Frequently cited examples of copyleft are the GNU software licenses, such as the GNU General Public License and others under the Free Software Foundation, the Linux operating system, share-alike licenses under Creative Commons, and so on. These licenses do not need formal authorization, since they grant all rights to use, modify, and redistribute the material, so long as revisions or improvements are also kept within the public domain, that is, the commons. Within the field, there are, however, disagreements between different groups, such as that between the Free Software Foundation, led by Richard Stallman, and Open Source Software, which seeks to distribute software with a license that makes its source code available for revision and redistribution. Thus, the field is sometimes referred to as free and open source software. Many of these issues are discussed in a book edited by Charlotte Hess and Elinor Ostrom. The latter won the Nobel Prize for Economics in 2009. The book is called Understanding Knowledge as a Commons, and it was published in 2011. An extract from the book is included in your reading package. Briefly, the book seeks to conceptualize the knowledge commons in the digital era as a social ecological system. Its authors look at the role of research libraries and the open access movement led by scientists and scholars who publish and store their work in open access scholarly journals and databases, and the way in which technological advances, for example in software, may be shared and collectively improved, while we find new models of research funding. At the same time, they look at the dangers of the digital realm, the problem of disappearing web pages, the quick obsolescence of digital technology, and the question of the stability or durability of digital media. Thus, the digital commons movement has two aspects. One focuses on digital technology and the other on digital resources. In fact, the free and open source software movement is in many ways quite distinct from efforts to create digital archives, e-libraries, and other kinds of database. In some cases, large digital archives, such as the Archive of North Indian Classical Music, created at the School of Cultural Texts and Records, Jadavpur University, can be accessed on site but are not freely available online because of persisting copyright issues relating to performers or broadcasters' rights. The internet circulates a huge corpus of material freely available in the digital commons. However, not all of this material dispenses totally with the notion of intellectual property right or copyright. An example of this is the non-profit organization Creative Commons, which attempts to widen the range of creative works legally available to the public to view, read, or share, operating on the principle of flexible copyright. Creative Commons issues free copyright licenses called Creative Commons licenses, which allow creators to communicate which rights they reserve and which they waive for users. They replace individual negotiations and signed agreements with a some rights reserved copyright, which both protects and increases the accessibility of their work in the public domain. While Wikipedia actually also operates under a Creative Commons license, it is important to remember that not all works under Creative Commons can be modified or changed. For example, you can post photos to Flickr, or you can create a blog under Creative Commons, but you are not actually signing away your right to be acknowledged as the author of this material, and you are also not allowing, for example, others to alter or rewrite your blog or modify your photograph. Many photographers sign and date their work on Flickr or PhotoStream, and blogs are usually protected against hacking and piracy. In fact, some argue that Creative Commons, operating under the slogan "Some Rights Reserved," is no different from classical copyright, which also lists the rights of the author, from which she decides which ones she wishes to assign and which to retain. Before concluding, I would like to draw your attention to some challenges and threats to the digital commons. First of all, let me mention a problem that has already been noted in earlier lectures. Because digital technology becomes outdated so quickly, material that is stored and circulated digitally may no longer be accessible within a matter of 10 years or so, unlike books that can be read hundreds of years after they were written. Therefore, converting all the world's libraries to electronic repositories or e-libraries, useful though it may be in some ways, may not actually preserve their content for future generations. Indeed, those future generations may say of us that we lived in the digital dark ages and that our intellectual treasures can no longer be accessed. Secondly, the problems of rights and access will not go away, however much we advocate sharing in the commons. In the present social and economic dispensation, where writers, artists, and scholars are not directly supported by public funding, they will naturally seek to earn a livelihood from the sales of their works. This situation is rendered many times more complex by the huge investments made by publishers, funding bodies, and other organizations in the creation and circulation of art, entertainment, culture, and so on. For example, scholars who publish their articles in academic journals are not paid, but the publishers of such journals make huge profits from guaranteed library sales. One significant and distressing result of the move towards open access journals is an insistence by some journals that we must pay to publish in order to make the journal free to read. Given that academic careers now depend upon the publication and citation of one's work in reputed journals, many aspiring scholars are deceived into paying high fees for publishing their work in nominally open access journals. This produces a travesty of the notion of digital commons. On the other hand, authors naturally seek to profit from book sales, and publishers invest in both paper and e-book sales. In the year 2000, the popular author Stephen King started to serialize his still unfinished e-novel The Plant on his website, asking readers to deposit $1 for each installment that they read. However, King threatened to drop the project if the percentage of paying readers fell below 75%. On his website, King wrote, "My friends, we have the chance to become big publishing's worst nightmare." But this experiment in alternative publishing was never finished. Finally, the digital commons remains a kind of utopian dream rather than an actuality. In practice, it has brought about a considerable opening up of the knowledge field, and it is true that we are able to access and use quickly and easily large resources that might earlier have required us to travel long distances and spend a lot of time and money. But it remains the case that the field is very uneven and biased towards those who hold the physical resources, such as large libraries and archives located in wealthy countries. While there are commendable attempts to digitize non-copyright material and make it freely accessible, such as the Project Gutenberg site, which we mentioned at the start, many other archives set restrictions on use and access. At the same time, as we wander the spaces of the internet, lifting material for a paper here, grabbing an illustration for a lecture there, we feel that we are in a free-for-all, if not a free zone. In some ways, the present state of the internet, a paradise for plagiarists, hackers and borrowers, suits the postmodern culture of the remix like a huge, chaotic jungle where questions of rights, legitimacy, fair use, and so on are disregarded, if not actually forgotten, and whatever is out there is up for grabs. Thank you.